Hey boys and girls, welcome to music this week. As you can tell, I'm here in my classroom. I'm kind of cleaning things up, getting ready for summer vacation. And I thought, you know what? We're learning about the orchestra second graders, so I thought, what if I play you some of the instruments that we can learn about? Sound good? So today we're going to learn about the Woodwind family, okay? Today's a Woodwind family. Last week we learned about strings. This week we're learning about the Woodwind family, okay? And just like all of our other weeks, don't forget that it's the largest group of musicians that you're probably ever going to see. They play a special kind of music. Do you remember what that music's called? It starts with a col. Think about it. You got it? Classical music, right? Okay? And a person who can play an instrument well, they are called a musician. Musicians play music well. It's not a magician, it's a musician. Okay, sound good? And the person who's in charge is called the conductor, because the conductor is the boss, all right? Like I said, last week we learned about strings. Today we're going to learn about the woodwinds. And what I'm going to do, boys and girls, is I'm going to take you on a trip through time, because the woodwinds go way, 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 way back. So, let's get started. All right, boys and girls, so let's start at the very beginning. What is a woodwind instrument, okay? For a woodwind instrument to be a woodwind instrument, you need to have two things. You need to have wood, and you need to have wind. So the wood, boys and girls, comes from what the instruments are made out of, okay? Many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, all the woodwind instruments were made out of wood, okay? Nowadays, some are made out of metal, some are made out of plastic, just because they're a little bit tougher, but they all at one point were made out of wood. And some of the woodwind instruments, boys and girls, have a special little thing that's called a reed. Look at this. This is a reed. Let me bring it up here. It's this little piece of wood. Get it? Woodwind. And this piece of wood does the vibrating, which makes the music. The wind, boys and girls, comes from your lungs, okay? That's what makes the sound. So when the wood vibrates, using the wind from your lungs, it becomes a woodwind instrument. Sound good? So let's learn about our first woodwind instrument. This is the oldest one. The oldest woodwind instrument, boys and girls, that scientists know about is the ancient flute. I've got a picture right up here. Here's some flutes, boys and girls, that are 9,000 years old. Let me say that again. 9,000 years old, okay? And they were made out of wood, and they're kind of like this. You know, they've got the hole that you blow into. There's all these holes along the edge, and then it does the vibrating. And all these woodwind instruments, boys and girls, they are hollow tubes. See, look, R-M-E-T, okay? They are hollow tubes, and when you blow into them, that's what makes the sound, okay? So this flute, like I said, boys and girls, they're thousands of years old. But nowadays we don't make them out of wood because wood cracks and wood breaks really easily. So instead we make them out of metal. And as you saw, you can take it apart and you can keep it nice and safe, right? It's got all these little pads here. You see those pads? And these pads, boys and girls, that's what's going to cover these holes, okay? And as you cover and uncover those holes, you're going to change the vibration and you're going to change the sound. So let me show you how this works, okay? Just so you know, I'm not a very good flute player, but I am going to try my best, all right? Check it out. So you hold it sideways, okay? And you put the hole, see that, underneath your lips, all right? Now, I use my tongue to find the hole. Yeah, okay, there we go, all right? And then you close your lips just like this, see that? And then when you blow air out, you make that two sound. When I make that two sound into the hole, it sounds like this. See that? That's how you make it work. And then I can uncover and cover holes to change the sound. Listen. And then I can play songs. This is a simple song. This is Mary Had a Little Lamb. Listen, ready? There we go. That is the flute. Our next woodwind instrument, boys and girls, is not as old as the flute. Like I said, the flute is 9,000 or even more years old. This next instrument is only a couple thousand years old, and it comes from ancient Egypt. Now, over in Egypt, boys and girls, people built those great big pyramids, remember that? And even though Egypt looks like a desert nowadays, back then it was very lush and very beautiful. And they had all these big, long rivers. Growing along the rivers, boys and girls, was lots of grass. And this grass, the ancient Egyptians used to make paper and to make different kinds of mats to sleep on and baskets. But they also realized that if you took two pieces of this grass and if you tied them together, they could vibrate. This special type of grass, boys and girls, was called reed, okay? This has two different pieces of reed, and they've been tied together. Now, this is using wire, but the ancient Egyptians didn't have wire, so they probably used some other kind of string. And then when you blow into it, when you close your lips around it, and then you blow into it, it makes this funny sound. Listen. It sounds like a party favor, right? Surprise! Happy New Year! That's what it sounds like. Now, again, by itself, it doesn't sound very great. But when you take these reeds and you put it into a tube, kind of like the flute tube, with these holes, it makes a very interesting sound. Now watch. So I put this in here. Got it? See that? And see, it's long and skinny. Okay, it's made out of black plastic, but in the olden days, this was made out of wood. And this is what we call an oboe. A lot of kids think this is a clarinet. It's not a clarinet. This is an oboe because it has that double reed on top. Ready? Let's listen to what the oboe sounds like. It sounds very interesting. Ready? Tell me. Let's see. Here we go. Ready? Listen. Here is the oboe. See that? And when you play it, a lot of kids think this sounds like Egypt. Listen. Right? Isn't that cool? So that's the oboe, okay? Not quite as old as the flute. It's a couple thousand years old. It comes from ancient Egypt. Let's move on to the clarinet. All right, boys and girls. So the flute was 9 to 50,000 years old, okay? The oboe, a couple thousand years old. The clarinet isn't quite that old. It's a couple hundred years old. And as you can see, it looks an awful lot like the oboe. See that? They look very similar, right? It's made out of black plastic. It's got all those holes, right? And when you cover and uncover those holes, it makes different sounds. Here's how it's different. The oboe, boys and girls, has the double reed that are tied together. See that? And you put your mouth over both those reeds. The clarinet has a skinnier, flatter reed. See that? And that clarinet reed, boys and girls, goes on the mouthpiece. This is called the mouthpiece because it's the piece that goes in your mouth. Now, like I said, these instruments used to be made out of wood a long, long time ago. The clarinet, again, is made out of black plastic because that's stronger, but it still has the wooden reed, so we still consider it a woodwind instrument. So I'm going to put on my reed. It's right here on the mouthpiece. See that? And then I'm going to blow into it, okay? Watch. There you go, right? Now watch this. As I cover up holes, the sound's going to get lower and lower and lower and lower. Watch, because these holes change the sound. Okay? Now, I can play lots of songs like this. Kind of cool, right? Okay. So there's the clarinet. Very similar to an oboe, but remember, it only has one reed. Okay? Next, let's learn about the saxophone. So this, boys and girls, this next instrument, this last woodwind instrument, this is actually the baby of the Woodwind family. Even though it's bigger than all the others, it is the youngest. Now, this is called the saxophone. And the saxophone has a very interesting story. It was invented by a very famous clarinet player. His name was Adolphe Sax. Mr. Sax had this idea of creating a clarinet that was not made out of wood, but a clarinet that was made out of metal. Okay? Kind of like brass metal, like what the trumpets are made out of. So we built the body out of brass. It still has a mouthpiece like a clarinet. It still has a reed like the clarinet. But like I said, the difference is its body is made out of metal. It could play many of the songs that the clarinets could play, right? Right? It could play lots and lots of different songs. Because it was made out of metal, it could get very loud. Well, Mr. Sax brought his saxophone, get it? Okay, he called this his saxophone because Sax was his last name. Like if I made up my own instrument, it would be called a graphophone. But anyways, so Mr. Sax brought his saxophone to the orchestras and he played it for them. And guess what? They hated it. They did not like it one bit. It was kind of a failure. Mr. Sax felt like a failure for most of his life. When he was older, though, a new type of music was being made in a place called New Orleans. This new type of music was called jazz. And these jazz musicians were looking for interesting instruments to play their interesting new music. Well, the saxophone was definitely new. The saxophone was definitely interesting. And the saxophone quickly became a jazz instrument. Listen, when it plays jazz, it sounds like this. And that, boys and girls, is the 4 main woodwind instruments that we'll be learning about this year. All right, boys and girls, so that's the Woodwind family. Before we go, there's 2 little things that I would like to do, okay? Number 1, I have to apologize for my crazy hair. I was watching my video back here at home, and I noticed that my hair was like, I only had one chance to make those videos when I was over at Golden Brook because I had the instruments there and I only had one day. So I brought the footage home and I noticed that my hair was nasty, but this is quarantine. This is what we got. All right. So anyways, second thing, before we go, I want to take a little woodwind instrument quiz. Okay. Super simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 of the instruments up and I'm going to say a fact about one of the 2 instruments, okay? And I want you to see if you can figure out which fact goes with which one of the 2 instruments. Sound good? Okay, so let's give that a try. And again, it's not for any points. It's just to see what you remember, okay? Here we go. All right, boys and girls, so the first 2 instruments that I have up here, I have a flute and I have a clarinet, okay? So look at those 2 instruments. Try to remember what we talked about those, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you a fact about one of the instruments. I'm going to tell you 2 facts. Here we go. Fact number 1. Ready? One of these instruments has a wooden reed, and one of these instruments does not have a wooden reed. Okay? Second thing, one of these instruments used to be made out of wood, but now it's made out of metal. Okay? Look at the instruments. Which one has a reed, and which one is now made out of metal? Got your answers? Okay, well, here we go. The flute, boys and girls, is made out of metal. So if that was your choice, and you are correct, give yourself a firecracker. Ah, nice. And the clarinet, of course, the clarinet has that single reed. That's the one with the reed. Let's give ourselves a firecracker. Here we go. Ah. Okay, here's our next 2 instruments. I have an oboe, and I have a saxophone. Okay, you see them? Oboe and saxophone. Now, let's see if you can get this one correct. One of these instruments was made in ancient Egypt. The other instrument plays jazz. Okay? You think you know which one's which? So one of them came from ancient Egypt. The other one plays jazz. You ready? Okay. Let's see. The instrument that came from ancient Egypt is, of course, the oboe. If you got that one right, give yourself a firecracker. Ah, and of course that means that the saxophone plays jazz. That's a jazz instrument. Nice job, boys and girls. Hey, good work learning about the woodwind instruments. Next week is one of our last weeks. We're going to do the brass instruments and we're going to do the percussion instruments all in one. We're going to kind of squish them together, and then we're going to finish out the year. Okay? Hey, boys and girls, you have a fantastic day. And as always, booyah.